One of the more interesting things about life is for sure the various games of life, mostly involving human affairs, and some even call it the game of life in general, just as a sort of combined sum. There's the game of love, the game of business, the game of philosophy, the game of psychology. Really, that anything could be considered a game, but it's not always established by specific rules. But there are so many patterns that repeat over and over and over again. They basically become sort of unspoken rules. And that's why we want to know what game you're playing. Not always consciously, but it's because it's directly tethered to what a person intends. The intention of a person and what game they're playing are very tightly linked. And in the game of love, when a person tells another person, "Are you playing games?" they mean it seems as though you're doing and saying things that differ from what we've sort of come to understand is the aim of this endeavor. And then there's literal games, actual games, like basketball. There's no way to play basketball without first agreeing on the rules. You can't just make up rules as you go along because you can't even play the game that way. And once the rules are established, it may be considered cheating if you start making up rules along the way or inventing new patterns to win. And as time goes, new rules are introduced that everybody agrees on and seem to make sense, seem to aid in the competitive element. And the thing about basketball or any sport is you can play multiple games over and over again. Even the same teams, the same people, and never have the exact same outcome. Not even two plays that are identical. You could even try to script out an entire game, one that's happened before, and you still won't quite get it right. You might get close, but not all the way. And that kind of makes things interesting. That's why we keep watching. There's something about the coming together of two opposing forces to make a game that is utterly fascinating, and it really always will be. And it's the same with two people who come together. You can meet the same person over and over again and not have two identical interactions. Even if you script out a plot like a movie or a show or anything, and you do multiple takes with the same dialogue, it still comes out a little different. And in the same way, there's no two identical days. But that's what we want to know. And some games are characterized by certain attitudes or dispositions. There's the drug game. There's the political game. There's book smarts and street smarts. And some games are defined by aggression as the overarching attitude. And you simply won't survive in that game if you don't adopt aggression as your main point of view. And there's other games that involve politeness and decorum and civility. And without those things, you simply won't survive in that game. But even within those two opposing things, you have to have elements of each other to really not just survive, but do exceptionally well. Like in the situation where aggression is the main attitude, if you sprinkle in some politeness, you will be less predictable. people will be a little bit surprised at what you're doing. And if politeness is the main mode, like if you're in a ballroom and there's a bunch of fancy people around, and you have a little bit of aggression in there sometimes, you will throw them off and you will have a better hand, so to speak, because you're a little bit more fleshed out, because it's better to have multiple motives or be playing multiple games at once. And this is kind of what people mean when they say, so-and-so is playing 4D chess. It's chess, but it's with something more. It's somehow playing multiple games in one game, which gives you less predictability and more control. And there's another element. Arguably the most important element is the ability to improvise. The ability to improvise is at least half of the story. Because when you're playing a game, you have an intention in mind. You have something that you're trying to do. You have a motive. But that's just not how the world works. You can't just do that. Because we simply don't have the information to do that. We can gather all known information, but that's only going to apply up until this very moment. It's not going to account for future moments, even though it does add some ability to forecast. But the ability to improvise it's just one of the most important things a person can have. And that includes in sports with very direct set rules, with very direct and set aims. And that's actually what's made some of the greatest players ever are the ones who are able to improvise. And even in their improvisation, there's some expectedness to it. Like, I expect you to improvise. And it's always a little surprising when they do it so well. It's either, for me at least, one very, very important primary overriding motive for one given thing, or a collection of multiple motives that comprise one overall thing. Be it money, be it power, be it accolades, be it love. It's kind of better to have a collection in some circumstances, because you're just too predictable with one. Legacy is another one, especially if you start getting into politics and business. There's the restaurant game, the sales game. There's all of it. There's things that we've been involved with for so long that there's been developed sort of patterns that we see. And when you sit down for a job interview and somebody wants to know if you have experience in the restaurant industry, if that's what you're applying for, they want to know if you know those rules and how you've handled those rules. And have you even made more rules? Do you improve that sphere? There's the philosophy game. There's the game of science, which almost trivializes it, but it's not quite accurate to say it trivializes it. Really, it's what matters to you. And in the area of science, it's supposed to be objective. It's supposed to be that way, but more and more these days, it just seems less and less objective. It seems like there's I guess you could say, an intention in mind that sort of triggers things in the first place, which isn't a good direction for that field. It's supposed to be the field that has a built-in immunity to that, because the scientific method itself is objective, at least in theory. And I can't stress enough how important it is to improvise, but that relies on the ability to somehow trust yourself. And you can't just go out there doing that. You have to have, like I've said in the past, some palpable evidence of your own ability before you can start to rely on that. Before you can rely on that, you will very heavily rely on the desire to control. the desire to have fixed outcomes and fixed responses before you can rely on your ability to improvise. And I think that's why we like people who have been through some shit so much, because they've been through things that are just massive, and yet they've come out the other side. Things that, it's an overused term, but unprecedented in a area that's brand new, and they made it. That sort of experience is utterly invaluable. And there are hucksters. There are people who are complete and utter frauds. And part of what we're trying to do here as people is determine who are and aren't frauds. Because there's nothing worse than taking on the position of a discipleship or a studenthood and finding out you've been learning from somebody who has just been throwing a vacuum at you, essentially. And it's frauds who have seen the trappings of others who have played their game well and seen what comes with that and tried to emulate the exterior appearance of those things. And that's what they're after. And the thing is, there has to be something, I guess you could call, of enjoyment along the way. I mean, what a necessary component. What is love without enjoying every second of it? The rules and the patterns that end up forming around that game develop organically. But just like with an athlete, I mean, you have to enjoy that. Like, really, can you be that good if you don't? And, you look at the Michael Jordans of the world. I mean, that dude absolutely loved the game of basketball. Loved it. I mean, it was in every cell of his body, and you could see it in his style. And I think that's what really attracted more people than most other things, is just the appearance of him playing. And that sort of goes across really everything that we do, especially the things that we devote a lot of time and effort into. I mean, I get and understand that there's times where it's like, you can't just have that, You can't just always do what you love and reap the benefits all at once. It's a thing that comes with time and age. And your 20s is a strange period of time in figuring that out. Like, really. Sometimes sex is the aim. Sometimes that's your game. And over time, we can see what can bring that to a person. And sometimes love is emulated. But it's like I've said before, we build momentum. We always build momentum. Or we end up in a situation where it's not so much momentum that we're building. It's we end up surrounding ourselves with patterns. And I guess you could partially call them rules that sort of trap us. And that's what happens when you're defining these game rules by doing things that are motivated by things that you simply don't want. And you can't always know what you want. I mean, of course you can't. Part of this scheme of humanity, part of this whole game, the game of life that we're in, is one of discovery. It's a core facet to have no clue what this place is, how it was done, and what the true game rules are. And that's what so much of human endeavors have been. What are the true rules? And we observe reality, the universe, and we find these patterns, and we call them laws, the laws of physics. But laws by nature were put in by somebody. Laws are put on the books by lawmakers. And those laws, though, even they came from patterns. Like, having laws against killing people has come from some previous experience where it was deemed bad. And of course, because overall, what us human beings are trying to do is facilitate civilization. And we're trying to shed as much inconvenience as possible along the way, which is a pretty noble aim in my opinion, but everything has its sort of side effects at the same time because we don't truly know all the rules. And that's part of what we're doing. And hypothetically, if we did know all the rules, would it change the way we actually live? The way it feels on a day-to-day basis? I'm not so sure. Because the more that I found out through my life, I mean, in this age of information, you can learn about anything. And as far as I'm concerned, my day-to-day experience is still motivated by things not too dissimilar from what they've always been. Fascination in and of itself is a mysterious thing. Interest is a mysterious thing. It has a way of kind of pulling you along. And it's not necessarily aimless, but it's almost like how gravity affects us, how gravity affects other planets, other celestial bodies, what keeps them together, their particular makeups, their particular pull. It's like we have, like I've said in the past, favorite colors, favorite foods, favorite hobbies. And sometimes, like when I was younger, I wasn't always tall, but around 5th grade, 6th grade, I shot up to like 6'3". And at that point, I was already so immersed in basketball. I lived and breathed it. It was every single day of my life. If I wasn't at school, I was playing basketball. It was all day, every day. And I started to wonder if my own physical body was in some way growing in correspondence with what I loved. You know, it was kind of a weird experience because my family is generally pretty tall, but they're not as tall as I am. And the advantages that gave me are just insane. I mean, imagine being in 6th grade, and already being like 6'2", 6'3", and you're playing against kids who are like 5 feet tall. It was just like an adult amongst children. And I started to think it was because I wanted it more than they did, you know. And as I lost interest in basketball over the years and other things started to come up, my interest became more intellectual and philosophical, and again, corresponding with that, it seemed like, I don't know, I don't really know what to call it, but I seemed to, in other ways, improve and grow with that. And I think there is definitely something to that. Those things that you love, that you just can't help but do, you have to do them because you kind of grow in parallel with it. And if you do things that you don't love and you don't want to do, I mean, how do you grow in that situation? Like what do you become in that situation? I don't really know. Because so far I've done the exact opposite because I simply can't help it. And I wouldn't have it any other way, to be honest. And in friendship too. People kind of pair bond, you know, and we feel each other out, and we ask questions, and we poke and we prod because we really do want to know what kind of game you're playing, what kind of games have you played, what other games are you involved with currently, what can you tell me about them, what is your experience so far in understanding the rules and the patterns surrounding those things. And again, along the way, there's a sense of fascination too, because there is something about the actual bonding itself, like with love, romantic love, that is really the point. I mean, you can talk about marriage and stuff, having kids, and those can be seen as almost outward destinations that are symptoms of what you feel. But the whole thing that justifies that sort of speak, that sort of conversation, is what you feel. And as I've said in the past, there really is nothing greater than people who love each other who, you know, as a symptom of that, decide to be together for the rest of their lives and make more of them. I mean, you know, it's a pretty great thing. And along with all this, there's intelligence itself. How many steps ahead can you see? How often are you right? And it's a weird thing too, because there's your will on one hand and circumstance on the other, which often involves a whole series of other wills. So you kind of get used to the effect your will has on the world and other people, and in what amounts and when you're in what mood, when you feel how, when you've eaten this or eaten that, or drank this or drank that, taken this or taken that, wore this or wore that, drove in this vehicle or that vehicle, wore this or that cologne. All of it. We just get used to how our very existence bears onto the world and how the world bears onto our existence. And those things can be thought of as little square cutouts, little boxes, you know, where you just come up with a word for each. Amount of cologne, clothing style, general attitude to adopt with this person or that person. And you sort of figure out the rules in a weird way that aren't exactly rules, as I've said, but they kind of end up being reliable. That combined with your ability to improvise. And with that all put together, you can get a pretty good picture of what's going to happen. Especially if that's complemented by words that have been said back and forth between you and somebody about what you both intend. And obviously it's a surprise when those things don't happen. But in the world of politics, it really is helpful to have more than one game you're playing. If you're just playing the power game, man, you're just so boring. It's like, dude, I can see right through that shit. And like, the way you speak when all you care about is power, it's just weak. It doesn't carry anything. There is nothing being carried in the air. Your voice vibrates when all you care about is power. There is no passion in the air. There is no presence around you. You have to have more. And this day and age, it's like the things that we say and do don't just dissipate into the ether. Often they are recorded. And people can relive the experience of you over and over again. And people can become pretty familiar with your game. And if I ever got involved in politics, it would be for multiple reasons. The one above all else would be to genuinely improve the lot of those who I am responsible for. Like, I can't think of anything more rewarding, because that is the route to immortality, is to live in such a way that people never forget your name. Of course. We all know the name Jesus because, I mean, there's only been one person who sacrificed themselves for the whole of mankind. And the intention behind that is clear. It's not always preached properly. In this day and age, I don't find fascination with the words and preachings of the church. It just bores me. It's not the good stuff. And it's not really philosophically riveting. Honestly, to me, it just seems beneath me, you know. And I don't mean that to make myself sound like I'm just some whiz. I mean, I think most people probably feel that way because it's just full of platitudes and, you know, repeating the same shit over and over and over again. How are you supposed to grab hearts and minds and souls with that sort of lifeless speech, and even worse, a lot of those involved with the church who have sought positions in the church have been to have access to certain people. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're doing it wrong, dude. Like, that's not how you do it. Like, where's the fire? Where's the passion, the true reverence? It should be obvious in your every word. And the Pope shouldn't even exist. We're not here to revere men, humans. That's not why we're here. And if you're involved with a religion who has as some part of it a message that tells you you need to kill somebody in the name of God, you're serving a man, not God. You are officially under a hijacked premise. Somebody is using the authority and words and position of an almighty creator to do their, I guess you could say, earthly deeds. And you should never buy into that game. You should just not do it. The world will be made a better place for each person that says, nah, I'm good on that. I don't think that's what God wants. Like, doesn't that seem obvious to you? Like, does that not seem pretty clear? God does not want you killing each other. No matter what the justification is, no matter what the mental gymnastics are to get you there, it's not God, it's man. And it's going to push a person or a group of people further into the wilderness, further into obscurity, more and more lost, more and more confused. And that's just not what we want. We want as many people on this planet as wealthy as possible, as informed as possible, as intellectually sound as possible, as philosophically sound as possible, as well-rounded and healthy as humanly possible, as many people, no matter who they are. That is the aim of us here on Earth, and that's it. That's it. And honestly, we could and should be in a situation where the outward trappings of the middle class should be the lowest class. The middle class, as it exists in our minds and in reality, should be the lowest state of affairs for people on Earth. I know there's a lot of us, but it's totally doable, because the more wealth that everybody has, the more time they can devote to real thinking and truly choosing their leaders. Not out of desperation, not out of fear, not out of economic manipulation, out of thought. Of course. That's why we're here. And I think we all know that. But to be honest, we're just now, like I said previously, at the tail end of a lot of things. We're in a sort of simmering of a lot of things. And we're reaching a point where, like I said, there's going to be more than one motivation to do things. Profit is always going to, you're always going to need to profit. And along the way, make as many others profit as much as possible. But other motives are going to need to be added in there. Like the overall wellness of first the people around you, because that's where you always start, that's where you have the most effect, and slowly out in concentric circles. And it's not idealistic. It's exactly what we do when we want to. And I'm not some hippie. You know, I think the hippies were way too postmodern, way too abstract. You know, it was all down, tear down with sort of hokey, uplifting messaging. That's not the right way either. It always has to be a synergy of cold, hard reasoning and logic plus heart, It has to be a plan plus improvisation, but improvisation with the plan in mind. And this stuff, none of it's new, and really nothing that much of us say will be new. But that's not really what matters. It's how you say it. It's the arrangement of these words are like keys. And it's the order of the words and how they're said that will affect us. And it's like I said, the politician who has certain motives. Just power. Those words, they simply won't affect us. It'll be like words hitting up against a brick wall, or just in one ear and out the other, because that game is obvious. That game is old. It's antiquated, even though power is a necessary part of human life. If that's all that you care about, you're just simply, as I said, in the way. And it's sort of the natural direction of man as I see it. Because we have really come a long way, to be honest. As much as there's people who will tell you the opposite, which is hilarious, but we've come a long way. And as time goes on, we will continue to do things that removes as much of the burden as possible from people. And we all need more time to think so we can make better calls. So we can have hard evidence of us making better calls so that we can continue to improvise better.